gentlemen, welcome to the second episode of the What Now show, presented to you by yours truly from the That's What That Was show. My name is Suryansh Basumalik. I will be your host, and with us is a very special person in his field. He last on our last episode we had the captain of the Indian women's rugby team, Miss Babis Barucha, and this time we are moving from the world of sport all the way to the world of science, where we will be going into a topic which is of a huge interest over the last few months because it has been so prevalent in our lives. Of course, it's the coronavirus, and we are talking to the most credible sources, any a researcher into the field himself, Dr. Sumit K Chanda, who earned his PhD from Stanford University in 2001. He received his postdoctoral training at the Genomics Institute of Novartis Research Foundation, GNF, and subsequently transitioned to a group leader position and established his research group in the division of cellular genomics at GNF. In 2007, he joined the Infectious and Inflammatory Disease Center at Burnham Institute for Medical Research as an associate professor, and he was then promoted to professor in 2013, and now in 2015, when he was promoted to the director of Immunity and Pathogenesis program at Sanford Burnham Prebys Medical Discovery Institute. From India himself and all the way in California, joining us from Stanford to Sanford, the COVID researcher himself, Dr. Sumit Chanda. Doctor, how are you?
Good. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Glad to have you. So, tell us one thing. You, of course, leadership's been in your role for a long time. And how did you first hear of the coronavirus and COVID-19? And what were your first initial impressions on it?
Yeah. So I heard about it through one of my scientists in my lab. He went home for the Christmas holidays back to China with his family, and he was texting with some friends in Wuhan in the Hubei province, and he told me that there are these reports of unexplained pneumonia that are pretty bad, much worse than you're hearing in the press, and it's been linked to a coronavirus. Okay. And being a virologist, there's two types of viruses that when you hear that there's a new one on the scene, you get to start getting worried real quickly. So one is influenza virus. I think most of your audience have heard of influenza virus. The second one is a coronavirus, and probably before January, most people haven't heard of the coronavirus. But the two things that these have in common is that they can go from what's called their reservoir, so that's the animal species that they commonly live in, and jump to humans. And that's a process called zoonotic transmission. And that happens with a lot of different viruses, including things like Ebola, influenza, Zika. The thing about coronaviruses that make them particularly dangerous is that they're transmitted through what's called respiratory transmission. So that's through the mouth, through coughing, sneezing, breathing.
Right.
And so in contrast to Ebola virus, where you have to have direct contact with someone that has Ebola, really have some transfer of bodily fluids, here the virus can really be transmitted by a single person getting on an airplane, flying someplace else, and breathing or coughing on somebody, and that will seed a new infection. And so it has this explosive potential for growth that we're seeing right now. And so when that happened, when I heard about that in early January, that's really when we decided that we need to start working on it and find potential solutions for what was then an epidemic in China, but we all knew, we were hoping that it would be contained in China, but we knew that this was potentially going to become a global pandemic.
Well, speaking of which, let's talk about how coronavirus originated itself. So, I mean, of course, there are a lot of theories coming in from everywhere. Someone said it's a virus created by the Chinese. Like President Donald Trump himself said it's a Chinese virus. Quite a few people have different theories on it. It was a bioweapon that went loose or something or the other. So, what do you think it really generated out of? I mean, of course, in your professional opinion.
Yeah, you can tell a lot by looking at the sequence of the virus, and we have a lot of data. So this is definitely a bat virus. Coronavirus, a number of coronaviruses come from bats, including the 2002 2003 coronavirus. So really, the big question is not necessarily is it a bioweapon or is it escaped from a lab. It didn't. This is uh, uh, really, Trump says it's a Chinese virus. Well, yes, technically, it's a Chinese virus in that it originated from China, but there's no virus that knows international boundaries. So I think calling it a Chinese virus it's meant to do that in a derogatory fashion and not necessarily a scientific fashion.
Right, that
Um,
makes sense. Yeah.
but if you look at the sequences, there's a lot of viruses jump from different species, either directly to humans or through intermediates. And so this virus looks like it had an intermediate host called the pangolin. And so there are sequences that are hybrid sequences between a bat virus and the pangolin virus. And it's unclear whether that kind of mixing uh, really caused the virus to be as pathogenic as it is here, or the virus picked up adaptations when it first jumped to humans and caused it to be more highly transmissible between humans. So those are studies that are ongoing by different scientific groups. But this is a natural virus. This happens on a fairly regular basis. But every once and again, you really get a virus that has the properties of coronavirus. I think, the vexing thing about this virus is that, not that it's the most lethal virus that we've ever seen. Ebola, the original SARS, the original MERS has a much higher what's called a case fatality rate. There are a number of people who die from exposure to the virus. Um, the hard part about this virus, I think, that's making the most challenging is the period in which it can be asymptomatic, which means that you have the virus, you're making the virus, but you're still able to transmit the virus. So if you're sick, you can stay home and say, okay, well, I'm sick. I'll stay home so I don't pass it to people. But there's a long period for this virus, up to 14 days, where you could be what's called shedding virus and passing it on to people, but not know that you're sick. So there's no effective way to quarantine. So the virus really replicates itself as much as possible. So from the eyes of the virus, right, it's not the best thing to kill the person you're infecting, because once you kill that person, that's a dead end, right? The virus's goal is to make as many copies of itself
Yeah.
as it possibly can. Kind of that's where the term viral video comes from, right? You really want to, if you watch a viral video and then die, you can't pass it along to anybody else, so it'll never go viral. And it's the same with the virus. And so this virus has really found that sweet spot, right, where it does kill people, but not enough to really stop its ability to transmit as far and wide as possible. So that's really been one of the great challenges of the virus. And getting back to my original point, it's not clear if it picked up those mutations, well, in the bat or in the pangolin, or maybe when it first jumped to the human species, it was circulating at a very low level and then picked up additional transmission that really gave the virus these properties that are causing this worldwide global health crisis.
So let's talk about when your friend actually informed you about these cases. So do you think
Yep.
that Wuhan could have done a better job of, like, let's say if we go back in time and we could have done
Yes.
things differently, do you think that if actually China had reported the virus's origination a bit earlier, we could you could have done something about it that would have helped ease it down a bit in the world before it really spread to what it is now?
Yeah, so you always want to try to stop a fire while it's fairly well contained, right? If someone's smoking in the house, it's better to stop the fire in the ashtray before it consumes the kitchen. So could China have done a better job? Yes, right. I think that it'll turn out that the virus probably was circulating in Wuhan earlier than we think. Could the WHO done a better job? Yes. Could world governments have done a better job? Yes. This is the U.S. included. I think right now you can add to the list India, Russia, Brazil. There is blame, plenty of blame to go around here. And I mean, it's not just Trump in the U.S., right? There's plenty of governors and local authorities that are still not taking the virus here seriously, okay? Or outweighing the economic impact of the virus versus the health impact of the virus. And what they don't realize is that the health impact is also the economic impact. If people are afraid to go out and go to restaurants and bars and movies, that is an economic impact because of a health impact. So if you don't control the virus early and quickly, it's going to be unmanageable, and you're going to have the worst of both worlds. So I sincerely hope that the entire world learns a lesson from this. Scientists for a long time have said this is inevitable, right? Like what we're saying with climate change, that nations around the world are failing to heed the word of scientists. This is not something that is really a surprising event to a virologist, right? We didn't know when it was going to come. We didn't know in what shape it was going to come, but we were saying, look, we need better surveillance. We need better countermeasures. And we need a global unified response to this. This is not a local problem. This is not a country problem. This is a worldwide problem. And unless you have a coordinated worldwide response, you're not going to be able to adequately combat this. This is a failure of leadership at multiple levels throughout the world.
It's quite right, because I mean, of course, you see it all around the media, the different sources coming up and different media agencies saying scientists have said this about the virus and scientists have said that about the virus, and you don't really see the government paying a lot of heed to it or really responding to it that way. So do you believe that the work of most of like a society of scientists as a whole has been taken a bit too lightly, and now governments are really now that they've seen it firsthand, they're starting to take you more seriously after the damage or after the first punch has actually been struck?
There's two
Sir,
issues, right? In worldwide, there's been an anti-science. Oh, are you frozen? Am I? Okay, is that
yeah,
better?
it's back, yeah.
Okay, it's back. Okay, great. So I think I was saying there's two issues at play here. I think worldwide and definitely in the U.S. there's been an anti-science sentiment that's been pervasive, whether it be denying or downplaying the impact of climate change, or other vaccines, other well-proven scientific premises have been dismissed for political reasons, for political expediency. I think the other issue has been that, look, this is a new virus, and we're learning about it in real time. And the things I tell you this week uh, can change next week. That's just how science works, right? We gather evidence, look at the data, and reappraise what our conclusions are, right? And if we're wrong, we're wrong, and we change it, and we let the data drive our conclusions, right? But a lot of people interpret that as, oh, you said this a month ago, and now you're saying this, and so you don't know what you're talking about. And so, most of the time, this kind of science is done in the scientific sphere, where we don't really engage with the public until there's some level of consensus. But because this is a global emergency, the data and the results are being interpreted by people in the public as well as the scientists at real time, and of course that's going to change, right? That's just the nature of science. The more we know, the better we can arrive at conclusions, and if those conclusions are different, then they're different, right? That's just a scientific process, and I think people need to understand that. It's not that there's a right and a wrong. It's just when we get more knowledge, we rearrange our thinking based on that knowledge. Are the governments paying more attention to us now? Yes and no, right? I think that there are portions of the government that are, but there are, for some reason, global health has become politicized, and it's become, a point of either pride or shame for certain leaders, and I think that's when people start denying science and denying the facts because it's politically expedient, and that's been some of the frustrating aspects of things, is that people are really putting their political points of views and political viability above what the science tells you. And the virus doesn't care what party you are or what country you're from, right? And so, science frankly doesn't care either, right? This is a global health problem, and we're giving the best advice that we have based on the data that we currently understand.
Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. I mean, so of course, let's go back to when you spoke about consensus among scientists, right? So when it comes to COVID, are you working completely alone, as in Sanford Burnham on its own, or are you working with other universities with
So,
studying data together?
yeah, so this has been really an unprecedented worldwide scientific effort. And then really been in organic form, right? I wish that there was some international body that was coordinating us, but in the absence of leadership at a global and a national level, at least in this country, scientists have really taken upon themselves to find solutions. And so, my story is just a small example, but we are working right now with hundreds of different scientific groups from all around the world. But I can tell you, the primary research project, the one, once I heard in January that there was this new coronavirus, we did a couple of things. We put together a scientific go team here of virologists from UCLA, from Mount Sinai, in New York City, and out of Hong Kong. And so there's a professor out of Hong Kong. His name is Dr. Yuan. He was the scientist that isolated and discovered the original SARS coronavirus back in 2002, and they had a sample of that virus in his lab, of the 2019 virus in the lab, that they had isolated from a. Am I still freezing up again?
No, no, we can hear you. We can hear you.
No, yeah, okay. So there's he had an early sampling of the virus in the lab from a patient in Hong Kong. So you have to remember, this is when the virus was only in China and not in the US or in Europe that we knew of, right? I think we'll go back and start probably finding out the virus was in our countries much before the initial cases were reported, but this is the first clinical isolate that was really available. Um, it was going to be difficult to ship this virus for obvious reasons out to our lab. Uh, we have to have very, very reinforced security measures and safety measures when you handle the virus and ship the virus. And at that point, there was no protocol put in place to be able to send the virus internationally. And so what we did was we were going to ship him some of the tools that we have in the lab to study the virus. And one of my scientists was going to fly to Hong Kong to help them essentially find new drugs for the virus. And at the time, this was early February, we're getting ready to pack things, and the scientist in my lab, she's an Italian scientist. Her name is Laura Riva. And she was ready to go to Hong Kong. And at that time, the U.S. imposed this travel restriction, which she could have gone to Hong Kong, but she would have to quarantine in a non-SARS-CoV-2 country for 14 days, which would have been very difficult for her. So it would have been difficult for her to come back. So what we decided was we're going to go ahead and ship all of our equipment, ship all of our what are called reagents, these potential drugs that could cure or at least help stop COVID-19. And she got up on the phone and, much as we're doing right now, used WhatsApp and did experiments from 7,000 miles away in the middle of the night with the Hong Kong group. Really an incredible, remarkable effort. You know, we always joke, drug discovery. Now there's an app for that because you really use, so WeChat is the name of the Chinese equivalent of WhatsApp. And so she was on WeChat teaching them how to do drug discovery. So, but it's really just a microcosm of how scientists have come together in unprecedented ways across countries. You know, the barrier between public and private. You know, we're a nonprofit research institute. We're now working with Eli Lilly, a drug company, to help them find novel therapeutics. We have a program where, you know, if you're a company that you think you have a drug for coronavirus, but you don't know how to test it because we have, as I mentioned, you have to have a very specialized, secure testing facility. People have to put on, you know, what are those space suits? You've probably seen those in the movie. Yeah, the hazmat suits. You're contained, so there's no possibility of you encountering the virus. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, and if you haven't had previous experience working with dangerous viruses, it's difficult. So, say you work for a company that has a drug that you think could work, we will test it for you for free, and we have a program that every 3 weeks we just do this testing because we need to do it, right? We don't charge you anything. We don't say you have to give us any money. If it works, go get us a cure and help us get control of the pandemic.
That must be fantastic, because in light of that, it only brings one concern to my mind, right? Because something as because I would assume for a virus like coronavirus, you would require you require these vials, right? That wherein these vials are made of a very different type of glass that's different from the other types, where it contains it securely, right? So I mean, I would assume it's much harder to and much more costly to create many vials. So
Yes.
when it comes to mass production of this, wouldn't and considering the crashing economy already, how do you think that the mass production of this potential cure is really going to happen? Because first creating it, shipping it all around the world, injecting it,
Yep.
getting to these places. Yeah.
So fortunately, so the virus, when we got it, right, this was a virus that is new, and so we didn't know how to grow it. But it turns out that it's not that difficult to grow once you understand the conditions. But I think what you're talking about, so we grow the virus to study it, but cures or vaccines don't have only have a vaccine will only have a small component of the virus within it, and the cures are actually chemical compounds, so they're synthesized outside the scope of the virus. So let me start with the chemical compounds. So remdesivir, which is in the U.S. Been granted emergency use authorization. Actually, a very complex molecule to make. And so, to your point, global shortages of remdesivir are likely going to occur. And so, this is the drug from Gilead. It is a multi-step synthesis, and it takes a long time and very expensive to synthesize. So one of the things that we need to do is bring in other drugs that are cheaper to synthesize and more widely available, okay, in addition to remdesivir. Remdesivir is a good first step, but I think that we're going to need additional compounds, and hopefully some of the things that we're working on will require this. We'll be able to meet this. The second is the vaccine, and vaccine production for billions of people, not just production, but the logistics of delivery is going to be a major logistical issue, right? So the technology to scale is there. There are multiple different vaccines that I think are going to be at least effective in the short term. And so it will be a challenge. And, you know, as you said, if economies in places like the US and China shut down, which manufacture these things, it will be more difficult. But I think that we will be able to find a way. These technologies are not new on how to make these vaccines. We're just moving little pieces in and out. We're swapping, say, pieces for that we've used previously for HIV vaccines and putting in pieces of the coronavirus to make the vaccine. But it is going to be a worldwide challenge. I think it'll be an effort like nothing we've seen in the history of civilization. But I think that we do have the capacity to do this. My bigger concern is what's called vaccine durability. So you can give a vaccine, and some vaccines you're protected for life or for 20, 30 years. Coronavirus vaccines will probably not be like that. If we get protection out to a year, I would be ecstatic. Like the flu shot, where you have to get a new shot every year, it's likely that the coronavirus will require something like that. Again, another global logistical challenge. I think I caution people listening that, look, this is not going away. It's not going away now. It's not going to go away, in 6 months. This could be something that's with us, like the flu, right? The flu that we have going around right now is the same flu that we saw in 2009. Okay, the swine flu. And so it may be that we have to learn to live with it, and it won't be as devastating as it is right now, but it could always be percolating in the background. So we need to figure out a way. If we can't eradicate it, we find a way to manage to live with it.
So when it comes to eradication, of course, throughout different countries, there's been lockdowns imposed. There's been multiple schools shutting down. Like me too. My school, I'm working. My school's running online. We started school today, and it's all online, right? So, what do you think is really going to be like the next step, wherein schools eventually start opening up? You could start moving there, but so do you believe that we have to wearing masks and gloves and taking sanitary measures, like the usual stuff, but at a higher rate? Do you think that would be something that's more of a regularity because of the presence of coronavirus now?
Yeah, and I think until we have a vaccine, that needs to be the new normal. In the U.S., again, the wearing of masks has been politicized, which is just something I can't fathom. I don't understand how that somehow has some political basis to it. But this is very strange times in our country. So what the mask does, and I think it's important for your audience to understand, it gives you some level of protection, but its main job is to prevent you from spreading germs, right? So when you go into surgery and your surgeon is wearing a mask, it's not to protect the surgeon. It's actually to protect you from any germs that the surgeon will carry. It does protect the surgeon somewhat, but if the surgeon really wanted to protect him or herself, he would be wearing one of those N95 masks,
Yeah.
right? And these are masks, and those are the only things that are protective. So if you have an underlying medical condition, you are particularly vulnerable, and those masks are available. Those masks really need to be made available for frontline healthcare workers. We use them in our lab because we work with the virus. But those are the people who need them. But once they become more and more available, if you're elderly, you have an underlying medical condition, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, I would recommend that you get one of those masks and limit yourself from going outside. Now, for somebody like you who's young and healthy, your job is to wear the mask just to stop the virus from being spread, right? So the key here is that R naught level, which is the number of transmission events uh, a single person has. Okay, so right now, if I were to get sick with the virus, typically I would spread it to between 2 to 3 people. And you could imagine that those 2 to 3 people spread it to another 2 to 3 people, and you could understand
How
why
to
things
take
go
the
like this.
action, yeah.
Yeah. And so what you want to do is keep that R naught level below 1. Okay. And so for every time one person gets sick,
Another person.
that person spreads to 1 or 0 people. Okay. And so if you wear a mask, that's what really helps bring down that R naught level. And so if we can get that R naught level to below 1, right, that's when we contain the virus, right? Eradication is a very tough word. We've had a polio vaccine for decades, and polio is still not eradicated around the world. We've had a measles vaccines for decades. Uh, we continue to have measles outbreaks in the U.S. Okay, what's called an advanced country still has measles outbreaks. Okay, so eradication, I don't think that we will see that. This will continue to pervade throughout the world because I think right now the genie is out of the bottle. We need to learn how to essentially contain and deal with it and make sure that going forward, if there is an outbreak, we know how to contain it as quickly as possible. There are certain countries who do this very well right now. Taiwan, Korea, Singapore have all really done very well at containing flare-ups. China, there was a recent outbreak in Beijing, and they were really able to come in and contain it. Um, and we need to learn how to do that. As far as going back to school, I can't give you a timeline. There's certain countries, like in Europe, where they've dealt with it very well, and so they had an initial spike. They initially didn't do a good job, but they've done a good job in containing and bringing those numbers down. Okay, right now, India, Brazil, Russia, the U.S. are still in the first wave of this virus. Will we be able to bring it down? I hope so. Um, will there be a second wave? I don't know. There doesn't have to be if we do this right. But if you look at, the last global respiratory pandemic was the 1918 influenza virus. It actually came in 3 different waves.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the second wave was much worse than the first wave. And the second wave came in the fall. Respiratory viruses by nature are seasonal. Okay, so they tend to go away in the summer, and they
right.
come back in the fall and the winter. Are we going to expect an upswing in the fall and the winter? Yes. Does it have to be like it is now? No, it doesn't, right? But it's going to require vigilance. It's going to require testing at levels that we're not even coming close to reaching right now. Okay, I would implore governments to find ways to test more and more, because there's no way you're going to be able to really contain this virus, even if we come up with the cure, even if we have a vaccine, unless you have really uh, good surveillance of this virus.
So I think so far from what you just said, I think what I can draw from it is you never really know what's really going to happen of the coronavirus today, tomorrow, or day after, or next week. So it may just become something that we'll have to live with, like the polio or measles. So let's really get to the technicalities of it. So let's say, for example, masks or something like you mentioned the N95. So
Yes.
I would ask you to debunk something here, because many people are as an alternative to masks and not spending money on it, they're trying to pick up their shirts and cover their mouths and using masks just like these ones and any other cloth masks. So,
Yeah.
what do you think is really the best solution? Because do you think masks like these ones, or cloth masks, or any rags, are they any good, or do they just provide some mental benefit?
So, the scientific answer is always, it's never yes or no, right? So, does something covering your face provide some level of benefit? Yes, right? Because listen, the virus is spread by droplets, right, that are coming in your mouth. So anything you can use to block the spread of those virus, those droplets will help. That mask you held up is a surgical mask, right? I can't tell from here if it's a multi-layer surgical mask. It does, yeah. So
Yeah,
those are effective, right?
yeah,
Yeah, those are effective. More effective than just putting, a cloth over your face or a sari over your face. If you don't have anything else, should you do that? Yes. Okay. But I would say a form-fitting mask, that's specifically something that's designed to cover your face, or a surgical mask, are the things that people are going to need the most. Okay. It's a nice solution, right? I don't recommend an N95 mask. We wear them in the lab. You could wear them for a couple of hours, but they are very uncomfortable. And if you have any sort of breathing problems, any sort of respiratory problems, those become even harder to really wear in extended situations. If you have access to the surgical masks, those, I find them to be the most comfortable. They're fairly light. I could do light exercise in them. Um, but any other mask that's for fitting, that goes around your covers your face, the less kind of air gaps you have, the better that mask is going to be, right? And so what you really want to do is stop those droplets from escaping your mouth. Um, None of it's going to be 100%, okay? But let's just say, I wear a mask and you wear a mask. Without a mask, the likelihood of transmission was going to be, 70, 80%. If I were to wear a mask, that would drop down to 20%. If you were to wear a mask, that would drop down to less than 5%, right? So you can just kind of see that there's no absolute solution here, right? Other than just staying home, and not encountering people. But if you have to go to school, you have to go to work, do it in a way that's the safest. There's no absolute guarantee that even if you wear a mask, you're not going to get somebody sick. But it's really the risk benefit calculation. If you can reduce the risk, and the key again, from there's the personal level, but there's also the societal level. If we can get the transmission rate down to below 1, right? then this no longer becomes a pervasive problem that then we can start easing some of those restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, so that actually brings me to my next question. I mean, you spoke about like how you at your institute like do a lot of testing for other companies, right? So, I mean, I would assume multiple other institutes are trying to test as well, right? So, of
Yes.
course, in doing anything you do, whether it be walking from this corner of your balcony to the other, that would still require some amount of energy on your part. So, similarly
Yes.
for testing, there's still some amount of cost to it, right?
Yes.
So when it comes to the sustainability of this amount of long-term testing,
Yeah.
how has it been like, adjusting with it? How is funding? Because I assume that is also
Yes.
a factor here.
So yeah, obviously, nothing's free. It does cost us money. Given the circumstances, essentially, we put it on a credit card, and now, the funding agency in the U.S., the National Institutes of Health, and the Department of Defense have been really good at coming and making us whole. But it is, long term. There needs to be another solution, right? We can't rely on people's goodwill, right? We did this because we had to do it, because it was an immediate and present danger, to humanity. But now that governments around the world have had a chance to understand the situation, right? I think that there needs to be a concerted effort. And if you think that testing is expensive, the disease is going to be 1,000 times more expensive than testing, right? Treating that many people, um, going on ventilators, the cost to the economy, the cost to your tax revenue base is going to far exceed the investment that you put in for testing. So yes, it is going to be expensive, but it's going to be the cheapest alternative that governments have right now to control this virus.
Yeah, so I mean, there's always something I've actually long heard. I mean, it's just a lot of word that's really spreading out in different countries that, if you get it once, you'll never get it again. And you're immune to it afterwards, right? So
Mm.
that brings me to my question that, people are just saying, just go out in the open, do whatever you want, catch the virus
Yeah,
whenever you can, get to the hospital as soon as you
yeah,
can, spend whatever money, get rid of the virus, you're A-okay. Is that really true?
yeah.
What's
Okay.
your outlook on this?
So, a couple of things. So I'm going to say most of that is not true, or we don't know enough. So what we're seeing right now is people with mild infections don't get any sort of immunity, right? So if you don't get severe infections, which means that you're in the hospital and in the ICU, you're not making what are called neutralizing antibodies. So these are antibodies that your body makes that can actually provide protection for the virus. And so there's no benefit, right? If you get mildly sick, or just sick enough where they test you in the hospital and tell you to go home, there's really doesn't seem to be any benefit for protection. So you will get sick again. If you are in the hospital, right? But that's a tough game of that you're playing, right? Because if you're in the ICU, yes, you may recover and have some protection, but you could also die, right? Or you
Yeah,
could get
exactly.
long-term organ damage. Okay,
Yeah.
you could get
It's
damage to your
it's
lungs, to your
right.
kidneys, to your yeah. Um, and the other question is, how long does that protection last? Okay, some people are saying it only lasts 3 months, right? Some people are saying it may last longer. Other coronaviruses, so the common cold is caused by a number of different viruses, including coronaviruses. And the reason we keep getting the common cold from coronaviruses is that our body can't make long-term immunity to coronaviruses or those coronaviruses. And so it's not illogical to think that we can't make long-term immunity to coronaviruses in general.
Right.
So the long answer to your question is we don't know, but if you have that philosophy, you're taking a lot of risks to you, to your family, the people you know, and it may be almost for nothing. So we don't know what the answer is, but it could be for nothing, and you're putting yourself and everyone around you at risk by taking that kind of strategy.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to that, I mean, like you mentioned, going into the ICU, it's going to be really a very big bet on your life, right? So, I mean, of course, there are implications to it, but I think what I'm trying to get at here is in the current state of affairs, because of this mindset, there's different mindsets about coronavirus, some very safe strategies, and some very go get it and get out of it as soon as you can. So, when it comes to people getting these cases, I mean, of course, hospitals are probably loaded right now with different people coming in with different levels of the
Yeah.
cases, right? So dealing with the ICUs, the ventilators, I mean, it's not as physically, I mean, from what I've heard at least, it's not as physically easy to bear with, even mentally,
Yes.
because you're completely paralyzed and you're not able to really move around. So when it comes to recovering from all of that and the mental rehabilitation, what do you think the best strategy is? Like, keeping yourself in lockdown under your own, keeping yourself in a locked room, mask and as much gear as you can to protect yourself and your loved ones, or actually stay in the hospitals and spend whatever you have to.
So I think if you're sick, and you need supportive treatment, you should go to the hospitals, right? Because your likelihood of dying or having long-term damage to your organs is much higher unless you're at the hospital. The hospitals are able to give you drugs that can help you, and those drugs can only so remdesivir, which is the approved antiviral, can only be given by IV, right? It's not a pill that you can take. There is a study out of Great Britain that suggests that dexamethasone can also be highly beneficial. Okay, so you need professional treatment. If you feel that you really have symptoms that are beyond your ability to cope, you should go to the hospital. The other issue with this attitude that, oh, I'm going to go get it and I'll be safe. Not only might you not be safe, hospitals only have so many ICU beds. Okay, and when they're used up, they're used up. And so what you don't want is a collapse of the healthcare system where so many people take up all the ICU beds, and for people who need the ICU beds, they're not able to get that ICU
Yeah,
treatment, because ICU treatment is different than regular treatment. That's why it's called intensive care. Okay. And if those facilities are not available because there's so many people getting sick at the same time, people are going to needlessly die, right?
yeah,
And if you go out and decide to get it on purpose, and you take up one of those beds, right? So it's not just you that you're risking, it's the other person who was actually doing the right thing and really should have been gotten that
yeah,
ICU
in the
bed,
place, yeah.
and that person couldn't get that treatment, and that person's going to die, right? So, you really have to think, just beyond yourself here. You have to think this is going to be a global, worldwide societal effort. Like it or not, we are linked internationally at this point, right? What happens here in San Diego can affect what happens in Calcutta, right? Which impacts what happens in Paris, right? We've seen this, and so we have to deal with this as a worldwide problem. And I think it's we need people to think as a global community, and make the sacrifices that and um, the best analogy I could make is back to World War II, right? Where, globally people were mobilized to do things and make sacrifices. The difference there was that there was an enemy that you can point to, right? Here, other than in a lab, we can't see the enemy, right?
Exactly.
And so it's hard to get people to get into that mindset, but we have to get into that mindset, and we cannot stop fighting until we have figured out that the disease has surrendered. And even then, right, we need to make sure that it's really under control for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, while you take the example of, like wars and, and so in this scenario, if I'm really to use that analogy, so it's the equivalent of saying like that, you guys are the soldiers really fighting the virus. They're trying to actually come away with it and, get the victory. So let's delve a little deeper into what you really do with your team at
Sure,
your lab.
sure.
So
Yep,
I mean, from the initial reading that I've really done upon your work, I've heard that you use current, as you mentioned, current cures for other diseases, and try to change it up a bit and apply that same formula to coronavirus.
yeah.
So another
Uh,
thing I've heard is the government has different trial stages, like 5 stages, and so what I'm really getting at here is what are you guys doing in your university, and how
yep.
far did they come, and like where do you see it going?
Just a little backstory. Usually it takes 10 to 15 years to develop a drug. Okay. We obviously can't just start and say, okay, we're going to find a new drug to coronavirus. So the viruses, sorry, the drugs that are currently being tested. So remdesivir, right? Originally, it was an Ebola drug. Okay. So it had undergone testing for Ebola. It had been put in patients already. So we understand that the drug is safe, right? That's one of the most important things about a drug is that if you give it to a patient, you actually want to make sure that the cure isn't worse than the disease, right? So we need to know a drug is safe, and that's a really really high bar to reach. And so what we focused on is taking known drugs. So these are drugs that have been in people before. So we know at what doses they're safe at. Okay.
Right, right.
And then we decided, okay, well, maybe by chance, like remdesivir, these also work on SARS-CoV-2. Okay. So we took 12,000 of these drugs and tested them individually to ask, okay, well, are any of them blocking SARS-CoV-2 from replicating? That's making copies of itself. So that the virus needs to make copies of itself in order to spread. And if you can block that, then you've come up with some sort of antiviral. And so we've tested that. We have about 20 drugs that we find that look to be exciting. Um, and this is work that we've put out into the public domain already. There's a site called bioarchives that scientists can go ahead and look at. And the nice thing about these drugs is that they've already been in people. Okay, we know that they're safe, and we're seeing that they can knock down the virus in the lab at levels that we expect them to be able to be exposed to in people. Okay, when you take a pill or take an injection, we know how much of that drug circulates. And then we backtrack to our lab results and say, okay, well, these are roughly equivalent. So we can expect to have some antiviral properties in people. Our next step is to test these in animal models. So there are animal models for SARS-CoV-2. We're testing them there. And now, because they're already known to be safe, we can go quickly to what's called a phase 2 clinical trials. So these are trials that are designed to show that they are efficacious in humans. The next step is phase 3, which does a larger study of both safety and efficacy in humans. And then you get right now what's called emergency use approval in the US, which is what's been given to remdesivir. It was given to hydroxychloroquine, I would argue, on limited data, but it's since been revoked. So right now, remdesivir is the only drug that's available for emergency use treatment in SARS-CoV-2.
So you've used the term remdesivir. Forgive me if I butchered the pronunciation.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Yeah, right. So my question is, like, of course, as you mentioned, remdesivir is a bit expensive to, give it to people in bulk. But has this compound really shown signs of, like let's say, have you applied it on actual human beings over treatment yet, or is it something you're just trying on animals so far?
So remdesivir, it was given emergency use approval in the U.S. based on actual clinical trials. And so what it found was it shortens the length of hospital stay by several days. So it's not a cure, but it does help you control the virus. Okay. So it's a critical and important first step. And like I said, it's typically 10 to 15 years to find drugs. This was done in a matter of months. So again, it's not a cure, but it's something that will help you fight the virus. So if you are sick and you are hospitalized, this will improve your chances and your outcomes of being able to leave the virus, leave the hospital and get rid of the virus.
Right. So, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, you would come out towards like 20 new exciting
Yes.
potential agents, right? So, of course, when you actually come across or are really close to a breakthrough like the one you're at right now, of course, world governments would really be interested because this could be the next big thing, you know. So
Right.
when it comes to like, you know, the cost benefit analysis and, you know, how, let's say you've gotten somewhere, are you really in communication with the government, the
Yes.
government authorities? So what kind of communication in the back door is really taking place, if there's anything you can, you know, tell us about?
Yeah, so I'm in constant touch with various agencies of the U.S. government, including the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense. The other thing that we do is that we put all of our data, we make it public as quickly as possible as soon as we're confident in it. And so there are organizations, including the NGO, that constantly monitor the latest data that are coming out. So there is a level of coordination right now that's ongoing. We're driving the science and discovery, but the government is ready to help us once we feel that we're confident that this should go into a person, right? And in order to go into a person, we want to make sure that it has a chance of being successful, right? And one of our key goals is to find something that's cheap, that's readily available, and that's easy to make, so that it can be given to the worldwide population, both from a therapeutic perspective and what's also called a prophylactic perspective. So this is something you take while you're still well that will help you from getting the virus. So, if there's an outbreak in, your sector in Salt Lake, and that that's going on, maybe they'll distribute these pills, to everybody over there, so then they can prevent that in a localized environment from that spreading. So, those are the different strategies we're taking. It's moving very quickly. But most of these things will fail, right? I told you there's 20 of things that we have. If we find one, I will consider that to be tremendously lucky. But fortunately, we're not the only ones doing this. There's tens and hundreds of people around the world, labs like us, that are taking similar strategies. And so I'm hopeful that if it's not us, it'll be somebody else. But we have to chase down what we have, and everyone else will chase down what they have. And hopefully by the fall, if there is a second wave, we will have multiple things that we can have at our disposal
Right.
in order to treat this virus. So I'm sorry, I'm running into my next meeting, so I have to sign
Right.
off. So if you have another question, I can answer that, but then I have to jump off here.
Right. No, not a problem at all. So I think what we really want to conclude with is that, because there's, of course, different countries tackling it, everything. So, I mean, of course, you mentioned you really don't know what's really going to happen in the future or whatnot. So I think what I'd really like to conclude by saying is that, you know, seeing as how you've come this far from when you were a kid to, you know, going past Stanford and getting into leadership roles in your universities and, you know, tackling things with your lab. So when it's been challenging as your role as a leader and the amount of work that's really gone behind it, how has it been for you as Dr. Chanda, as working with your members, and where do you see your work really going into in the latter parts? Where do you see coronavirus and your work as it's come from before, from what you found out from your call with your friend back then, all the way to where you are now and where you see it going later? So is there anything
Right.
to leave the world with, if there's one little statement or something you'd like to tell us? um I think you're cutting out. um
And, on a second.
yeah,
How's this? Better?
yeah.
Okay. So, and, I mean, all of us, knew that this would come one day, but, none of us were really prepared uh, for how this plays out, right? And so, there's really been a remarkable effort, heroic effort of a number of people in my lab and around the world. I think the one message that I want to leave everyone with is that, we need everyone to be heroes around the world. We need you to do your part, not just for this pandemic, but for future pandemics. So, you're a little young, but
I think we've lost you again, Doctor. I think we just wait.
when I
Yeah.
one second.
Could you rewind for a
Okay.
second? I think we got you from the last part,
Yeah.
but you're still very young. Yeah, carry on.
Okay. Yeah. How's it? So my what I'm trying to say is that these pandemics could be the new normal, right? So if you think back over the last 10, 15 years, we've had the original SARS, we've had swine flu, we've had MERS, we've had Ebola, we've had Zika, right? So, and now the SARS-CoV-2. So these are happening at a much more rapid clip than in the past, right? And so, yes, we are here on the front lines, and my colleagues have really stepped up and done really heroic things. Just and it's not just us; it's people on the front lines in the clinics, in the hospitals. But we need the world to really pay attention, right? And not just your leaders, right? You and everyone around you. You need to tell your leaders that this is something that we want to participate in, we want to help in, and we want to make sure that this never happens again.
Right.
The virus was uninvitable. Our response to the virus was not, right? And if we do not learn from these mistakes, this could be much worse the next time around. So yes, we have scientists, and me and all of my colleagues and all of the doctors are willing to sacrifice, right? But if people like you, the next generation, your audience, do not produce leaders that say, listen, we have learned our lessons here, and we pledge to be better prepared. And if the people, especially in democracies, do not hold their leaders accountable, then we are doomed to repeat this, but possibly much worse. So I would really encourage your audience to say, okay, well, listen, we will do what we can to get past this, but let's not forget. Let's not forget. Let's make sure that the world never goes through this again. It doesn't need to. We have the scientific capabilities, if given the right investment, to be prepared, to be better prepared.
Right.
We need to be. We need to be much that both our countries in India and in the U.S. We've stepped up to fight terrorist threats, right? And that's the kind of mentality that we have to have when it comes to fighting these viruses, right? It never stops, right? It never stops. You don't say that, okay, well, listen, Mumbai happened or 9/11 happened. We don't have to worry about terrorism again,
Yeah.
right? We have to keep worrying about it again. and this is going to be the same with the viruses.
Right. I mean, on that note, I hope I can confidently say that, like the coronavirus, this goes viral too, and we can transmit your message to the world as much as we possibly can. So, on that note, on a serious note, I think I speak for everyone watching and myself when I say, I mean, we really wish you the best of luck with your research, and yeah, thank you for joining in. And one thing I would draw from this is, no matter what the situation is with like lowly dense populated areas like any place, or high populated areas like India, you really have to be safe and you can't take a risk here. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, right. Anytime two people meet is a chance for the virus
exactly.
to jump. And so, it's not just a big city problem. It's not a high density problem. It's everywhere. And, I also want to thank you for what you're doing. This is a critical piece of the puzzle, right? The scientists, we do what we can, but if people don't understand what's necessary, our work will be for nothing.
That's
So
true.
it's very important that you really keep doing this and keep getting the message out, and keep getting the public informed as to the latest knowledge of science and the best ways to fight this virus.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. I really
That's
appreciate.
my pleasure.
Yeah, really appreciate you being here. And yeah, I think with that, I think we've wrapped up for today. And yeah, once again, I really wish you the best of luck in your work. And
Thank you.
yeah, I hope, let's say a couple of months down the line, when let's say any amount of breakthrough can be done, and hopefully it's from your institute itself or any other, and we can get back to this conversation once again. So yeah, thank you so
Fantastic.
much.
I would be happy to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr.
Okay.
Chanda. And yeah,
Okay.
I think yeah, thank you to everyone watching. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Yeah, that's what.
Okay. Stay safe.
Yeah.